Cellular respiration is the process of producing ATP from glucose. Cellular respiration takes in glucose in 6 oxygen molecules and creates 6 carbon dioxide, 6 water molecules, and approximately 36 ATP. The main stages of cellular respiration are glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain. Each stage produces some of the reactants of the next. Glycolysis is the first step of cellular respiration. This stage happens in the cytoplasm of the cell. Glycolysis doesn't require any oxygen, so we call it anaerobic. This stage uses 2 ATP to break down glucose into 2 pyruvate, which will be necessary for the next stage called the Krebs cycle, and 2 NADH, which act as electron carriers for the final stage, the electron transport chain. Glycolysis also releases 4 ATP of its own, and this makes 2 net ATP for this process. The second stage of cellular respiration is the Krebs cycle. This stage happens in the mitochondrial matrix. For this stage, pyruvate is converted to 2-acetyl-CoA and is fed into a cycle. Since the cycle takes in 1-acetyl-CoA, it will run twice. The cycle returns 1 ATP, 2 CO2, 3 NADH, and 1 FADH2. NADH and FADH2 will act as electron carriers for the final stage, the electron transport chain. The third and final stage of cellular respiration is the electron transport chain. This stage produces the most ATP out of any of the stages and happens in the inner mitochondrial membrane. There are multiple steps to this stage. First of all, the electron carriers from earlier, specifically NADH and FADH2, donate their electrons to the protein pumps that pump ions, specifically hydrogen ions, over the inner mitochondrial membrane. Remember, when full electron carriers donate their electrons, they revert to their empty versions, NAD+ for NADH and FAD for FADH2. Next, because there is a higher concentration of hydrogen ions here in the intermembrane space than here in the matrix, they begin to follow the concentration gradient back over the membrane towards the matrix. This process, where ions follow a concentration gradient over a membrane, is called chemiosmosis. The ions travel through another protein called ATP synthase, powering a sort of molecular water wheel. It's here where ADP and inorganic phosphate are converted to ATP. This process releases approximately 32 ATP. Lastly, oxygen acts as the final electron acceptor and accepts all the low-energy electrons. The hydrogen ions also bond to the oxygen, releasing water as a byproduct. In conclusion, cellular respiration creates about 36 ATP out of 1 glucose molecule, most of which comes from the electron transport chain. This powers the many functions that a cell must perform every day. Photosynthesis is the process that plants use to infuse light energy from sunlight to glucose molecules, which is a sugar that plants need. The overall chemical equation for photosynthesis is it takes in 6 carbon dioxide molecules and 6 water molecules and creates 1 glucose molecule and 6 oxygen molecules. This is an anabolic reaction because it requires energy, which comes from the sun. Photosynthesis comes in 2 main parts. The first portion is the light-dependent reaction, which requires light to happen. This reaction creates ATP. The second reaction, known as the light-independent reaction, also known as the Calvin cycle, does not require sunlight to be present, but does require the ATP from the light-dependent reaction to happen. This is the reaction that actually synthesizes the glucose. Because the energy, or the ATP, created in the light-dependent reaction is used up in the Calvin cycle, the net ATP for photosynthesis is 0. The first reaction is the light-dependent reaction. It occurs in the thylakoids. For the light-dependent reaction, sunlight is absorbed by the thylakoid membrane, which contains chlorophyll. Water is absorbed by the roots of the plants via osmosis. Furthermore, ADP and NADP+ is taken from the stroma of the chloroplast. In total, the inputs for the light-dependent reaction are sunlight, water, NADP+, and ADP. The light-dependent reaction is split into two portions, photosystem 2, which occurs first, and photosystem 1. Let's talk about photosystem 2 first. Photosystem 2 is where sunlight is used to excite electrons, which are passed to the electron transport chain. Water is split into oxygen gas, which is released into the atmosphere, and H+ ions, which are used for the ion gradient in the electron transport chain. This ion gradient is where ATP synthase happens. This creates the ATP output of the light-dependent reactions. Next, photosystem 1 uses another photon of light to re-energize electrons after the ETC. These electrons are then passed to ferredoxin, which reduces NADP+ to NADPH using ferredoxin NADP+ reductase. Overall, the light-independent reaction converts sunlight, water, NADP+, and ADP to oxygen gas, which is released into the atmosphere, NADPH, and ATP. The second half of photosynthesis is the light-independent reaction, also known as the Calvin cycle. This process takes place in the chloroplast stroma. For this reaction, the plant takes in carbon dioxide from the stomata, which are little pores on the leaves of plants. It also takes NADPH and ATP from the light-dependent reaction. There are three major portions of the light-independent reaction. These are fixation, reduction, and regeneration. Carbon dioxide enters the Calvin cycle and is fixed by the enzyme Rubisco to create molecules of 3-PGA, which is carbon dioxide combined with other carbon compounds. At the cost of 6 ATP, 3-PGA is converted to 1,3-BPG, and at the cost of 6 NADPH, 1,3-BPG is converted to G3P. 1 out of 6 G3P leaves the cycle and begins to synthesize glucose. The other 5 G3P molecules are recycled and reformed into RuBP, which allows the cycle to continue. In conclusion, photosynthesis is split into two major parts: the light-dependent reaction and the light-independent reaction, also known as the Calvin cycle. The light-dependent reaction takes in sunlight and water from the environment, as well as NADP+ and ADP from the cell, and converts it to ATP and NADPH to be used in the second reaction, as well as oxygen gas, which it releases into the environment. The second reaction, the Calvin cycle, takes in carbon dioxide from the environment, as well as ATP and NADPH from the first reaction, and converts it to glucose. After the second reaction concludes, the used up ADP and NADP+ is returned to the cell for later use in the first reaction, the light-dependent reaction.